Fair is a nice word to hear because obviously I designed the exam. I try to design it in a way so it looks like it just came out of nowhere. But of course, I made all of those questions. Um, so fair is a nice word for me to hear. Other thoughts, other reflections? Pretty straightforward. No big whoop. Chat, what do you guys think? Pretty fair? Giovanni says pretty fair. Fair sums it up. Okay. Not exciting, not interesting, but fair. I'll take that. Do you guys have lots of other things? Oh, guys, this is a little long. Fair enough. Yeah, I heard from my other section, they took the same exam, and they also said it felt a little too long due to trying to include the details. Yeah, the timer. Do you guys feel a little stressed about the timer? Okay. Do you feel like if I did 8 quotations instead of 10, would that be even more fair? Would you guys all like that more? Then they would be worth more though, because I'd have to do some math magic. Actually, I was doing some math magic because I teach yet another class. And I was thinking about doing that for them because this is a 300 level class. It should be harder than my 100 level class. So I was thinking 8 questions, but then be 2.5 per sub question. Do you think that is an easier format? Would you guys prefer that? Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe next time I'll do that for you guys too. We'll see. I guess I'll use my 110 class as guinea pigs. If they say 8 is too many for them, then I don't know. It could cut both ways because like if you just miss one sub question, it's only worth 2 points. If it's worth 2.5, it could start to add up. Um, they got stuck around 2 quotes left blank. Had to guess. Some quotes were hard to find if we didn't go over them in class. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so it sounds like it was challenging, but the overwhelming statements of fair makes me think not too challenging. So again, from a design perspective, that makes me feel good. I'll go over statistics at the end, and we can go over all of the questions. So if you have specific questions about the exam, we can go over those together. We'll go through one by one. So anyways, yeah, I'm happy to talk about all of that, but let's save it to the end. Most were fair. Bit tough to remember some of the quotes off the top of my head. Yeah. Well, that's what we got to study for too. Exactly. Yeah. So, okay. Well, hopefully it wasn't too painful, and hopefully you don't have too many other painful exams coming up. You guys still have a lot to do this week. A few more. Yeah. Hopefully after this week it'll start to lighten up again. But it's hard to predict these things. It'll lighten up for us, of course, because we don't have any more exams for I don't know 6 weeks. Let's check the syllabus. Actually, no, it's not quite 6. I think it's more like 4 or 5. Let's see. Let's get the hand. The hand, yeah. So where are we at? We just finished part 1, right? And so that was 6 weeks long. Now we're in part 2. Okay, yeah, it is 6 weeks. Okay, I was thinking something else. It is 6 weeks, so it'll be about the same amount of material. So nothing you guys can't handle. We've got another reading response in the middle. So you're thinking about what assignments are on the horizon. Actually, not very much, right? It's just this reading response. I will give some extra credit opportunities. I didn't talk about that yet, but let me put that together. We'll probably watch a movie at least part of this week, and so it might be related to that. Maybe I'll have to keep thinking about it. It's sort of a scary movie, so hopefully that won't be too disturbing. It's more like sad than scary, but it's a little bit scary. And yeah, I think that's about it. And then we'll have another midterm. So that won't be for a whole month at the beginning of April. And other than that, basically today and the next couple weeks, what we're going to do is we have 2 readings, just like we usually do, because we only meet once a week, right? One is more analytical, coming from Kyon or Anne Gleig. Or is it Gleig? Probably Gleig. And then one is more like a translation. And so for each of the weeks, we'll have the first part of class be a little more lecture heavy, where I'll just say things to you. And then the second part of class will be more adventure going through the text, right? So today we've got this is a mouthful, Tathagata Garbha Sutra. And I know you're probably frightened by that word, and don't even want to try to say it, but of course I will. I'll break it down for you and tell you what each of the pieces mean, and we can look through that together. I think I already told you this, but I would not be doing my job if I never gave you a sutra to read. So a sutra is a Buddhist scripture. So this is a real Buddhist scripture, right? And in translation, of course. And so we'll go through that today. Next week, we'll look at some meditations, like instructions for doing meditation. And then the following week, there's this manual for Buddhist magic that we'll look at too. So some interesting things on the horizon. Any questions about all of these plans? So then after that, we'll just write a paper. So you might be wondering, okay, we've got 2 exams. We just took one of them. We've got one more. We were just talking about the next one will be very similar to this one. And then after that, there'll just be a paper. So we'll read a book. You know, I asked you to get Novice to Master. We won't start reading that until April, but please do get that book. Then we'll read it, and you'll write a paper, and then we'll be done. Bada bing, bada boom. And, you know, this being week 7, we are like halfway through the semester. So I know it feels like a really rough time, and you guys are probably stressed out, and I'm stressed out, and you're probably grumpy and tired, and I'm kind of grumpy and tired. I don't know. I feel like tonight I actually feel a little less grumpy than I often do. I don't know. Maybe something good. Actually, yeah, I did get some good news, but we don't have to go into that. And so, anyways, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, we're deep in the semester, but from here on out, it's sort of, you know, it's getting closer and closer to the end. The bad news is there's no spring break. So you guys already knew that, right? Because the administrators are scared that you'll all run away and go to places where there's COVID and bring it back here, which is a fair thing to be scared of. So they canceled spring break, and now we're stuck having class after class. We will have a short Easter break, right? But our class won't be affected by that. That's the week I was thinking of kind of taking it easy and watching a movie. Okay, questions about stuff? Again, we'll go over the exam at the end of class. We all doing okay though? All right, well, let's start this new section, shall we? So there's a lot to say about general Buddhist traditions, let's say. And there are many ways to sort of cut the cake, so to speak, but this is a very common way to do it, is this language of 3 vehicles. Now, what we've been studying so far is something we might just call like mainstream Buddhism. I've been calling it early Buddhism. So I'll put it in the chat. Early Buddhism, mainstream Buddhism, something like that, right? Where these are like general Buddhist ideas that are shared across all the different types of Buddhism. But as you can probably tell from this map I'm showing you, when Buddhism moves through space and time, we could say culture as well, it kind of transforms in the process, right? And you could imagine something similar happening with other religions, although some are more resistant and some are more open to these kinds of changes, right? So for example, if we compare Buddhism to Islam, what language is the Quran written in? Usually. Arabic. Yes, exactly. And so that's actually a very special feature of the Quran, right? In my 110 class, I'm not an expert of Arabic or an expert of Islam, but perhaps you guys learned about Islam in your 110 class too. It's common for people from Central Asia, from different parts of Africa, from different parts of the Middle East, really widespread places all over the world, all to learn Arabic, all so they can recite the Quran in Arabic, because Arabic is a very special language for the Quran. There's something kind of similar to that for Buddhism. What if we had to pick one language, would you be able to tell me what it is? What is the special language for Buddhism? Close. So Hindi is the modern language of India. It's one of the many modern languages of India. There's another language. Mandarin? Say again, Mandarin? Mandarin's also a special language, and we're going to get to that too. There's another language, some of which, I think on your review sheet, I said These are terms of this language. Did I tell you what language that was? Pali's getting closer. Sanskrit, yes. Let's see, did I give you Sanskrit terms on your review sheet? I did. See, right there, Sanskrit terms. So you didn't know it, but these are all Sanskrit words. Buddha is a Sanskrit word. Dharma is a Sanskrit word. Sangha is a Sanskrit word. Karma, samsara, all of these are Sanskrit words. So this is an ancient written language of India. It's a very old language. People have been writing in it for a very long time. And so again, there's sort of this parallel, just like the Quran, the very special sacred language for Islam is Arabic. There's something very similar about Sanskrit and Buddhism. But as this conversation already shows, some people are already pointing out Chinese is another important language for Buddhism, and Pali is it's a more vernacular language, but it's also another important language for Buddhism in South Asia and Southeast Asia. As I've told you, I speak Tibetan. I read Tibetan, right? That's a totally different language, totally different from Sanskrit. So that's another important language. And the list goes on, right? We could keep going. Buddhist scriptures have been translated into so many languages, it's kind of head-spinning, mind-boggling, and to the point where, you know, the comparison between Arabic for Islam and Sanskrit for Buddhism actually kind of breaks down because there are so many translations. And you can imagine every time, for example, the scripture we read today, every time this gets translated into a new language, they have a whole bunch of things they got to think about, right? Each one of these terms has to be translated, redefined, right? And so, you know, we get garbage. I shouldn't call it garbage, but we get non-English titles here. Tathagata Garbha Sutra. I'm unimpressed by this translator. You got to translate your words, bro, right? If you don't translate the words, then the students get frightened and nobody wants to learn these things. So many people will just call this the Buddha Nature Sutra. It's a little bit off, right? If you read very carefully, you see Buddha Nature is Buddha Dhatu. Very close though. So we will call this concept Buddha Nature in this class because I don't want to frighten you guys by saying Tathagata Garbha. But other than that, it's actually, I think, a very good translation. So that's why I give it to you. But anyways, my point is, as Buddhism moves across the world, across time, across space, across culture, it must change, right? It must transform into new languages. And then along with those new languages come new ideas, right? New concepts, new values, right? New social concepts, new ways of having relationships with other people, right? And then sometimes Buddhism kind of butts heads with those new ideas, and then sometimes Buddhism might win, and sometimes Buddhism might lose, right? And so there's sort of an interesting question of what happens to Buddhism as it spreads around. So let's look at this map, shall we? I like maps. It's a little bit abbreviated. As you can see, Japan is cut off, but if I showed you the full map, then, yeah, Joseph got it, Sanskrit. If I showed you the full map, then Japan would be over here, and it would also be yellow. Now, one thing, just to kind of build off my previous question for you guys, this one will probably be a little more obvious. Where does Buddhism begin? If we had to put Buddhism on the map, what modern day country would we say is the most important country for early Buddhism? India. Yeah, India. Very good. So, like I said, a bit easier than the language question. There are many languages in India, so if you know, I don't want to confuse you by going through that whole list, but India is a country. Here it is. Now, here's a harder question. Why is India gray on this map? If this is where Buddhism began, there's no legend on the map, but what does gray usually mean on maps like this? I've made sort of a legend for you actually on the side here.
A sort of like what the dominant religion is there. So I guess in modern day, that would probably be like Hinduism instead of Buddhism.
Yeah, very nice. Very nicely stated. So Alexandra's thinking, okay, maybe there is some Buddhism there, but it's probably not the dominant religion. And so the dominant religion of India is Hinduism, and so maybe that's why it's gray on this map. And I think that's a very good statement. In fact, that is true. Now, you could take it even further and basically say Buddhism kind of dies out in India. It disappears. And it's a weird historical phenomenon. Some people want to blame Muslims for it, and I think that's wrong, historically speaking. But around 1,000 years ago, Islam does kind of come to dominate South Asia. There's the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire, the Taj Mahal. You guys know about the Taj Mahal? So that was built by a Muslim ruler, right? They were kind of the bosses of South Asia for about, I don't know, 700 years, pretty long time. And then the British showed up, right? So that's why it's gray on this map, is Buddhism kind of disappears. And it's actually, as Alexander explained it, is a bit closer to the truth. Really what happens is Buddhism kind of fuses with Hinduism. Did you notice on the exam how the gods were all over the place? On one of the short answer questions, I asked you about the gods, right, in the Buddhism book. The reason I did that is because they get left out in most tellings of the life story of the Buddha, right? In the Hollywood version, the gods sort of disappeared. Remember that? We did the comparison between the birth and in the book versus on the TV show. TV show, all the gods are gone. In the book, the gods are everywhere, right? So in any case, one let's say one result of this shared pantheon, right, the shared body of gods between Buddhism and Hinduism, is there's not a strong separation between the two, right? They kind of grew up side by side. They grew up in conversation with each other. There was debates between Hindus and Buddhists. They would talk to each other, right? And then eventually, particularly when there's kind of a new other in town, right? When there's a new other religion in town, then Buddhism and Hinduism kind of join forces, right? And they become basically one tradition. So I know that's kind of a long, complicated story, but I wanted to emphasize an important point. Buddhism basically disappears from India. But it doesn't disappear from the rest of the world. So what happens? Maybe I can switch to this map. We can come back to this one. I've got lots of maps for you today. So yeah, here you can zoom in and look at this on your own time, but we've got Buddhism originates in India in the 5th century BC, right? So that's 2,500 years ago. That's a good number to sort of have in your mind, right? When did the Buddha live? 2,500 years ago. When did Jesus live? How many years ago? 2,000. That one's pretty easy to remember too. How do you remember that? Year 0, right? BC is before Christ. So the Buddha lived before Christ, but when did Muhammad live? Which century? Is it before Christ or after Christ? After Christ. By how many centuries, give or take? Nothing? More than that. It's actually more like 5 or 6. I believe he was born in the 6th century. You maybe look that up. I don't want to give you false information. So it just very like back of the napkin calculation. Buddha is 2,500 years ago. Jesus, 2,000 years ago. Muhammad, 1,500 years ago, right? And they're kind of spread out about 500 apiece. So kind of an interesting development in just in human history. So Buddhism, when is it hot? It's hot, again, about the time of Christ. Buddhism spreading all over the place. It spreads kind of to the south and to the east. There's this Bay of Bengal. People kind of sail across this bay, bring Buddhism to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia. Vietnam mostly comes from, there's sort of a mixing there, actually. It's kind of complicated. Indonesia has some Buddhism too. There's also another route that Buddhism goes kind of to the west and to the north through Afghanistan. I saw there was a celebration of the Bamiyan Buddhas. You probably haven't heard of them before, but maybe you have heard that Buddhas, there used to be big Buddha statues in Afghanistan. Have you guys heard of these before? Let's look them up, because there was some celebration of like a 3D reconstruction of the Bamiyan, how do you spell it? Bamiyan Buddhas. So again, I know I'm talking a lot about Islam and Buddhist conflicts, and I really don't mean to present it as if Islam is bad to Buddhists, but the Taliban blew them up. So it's really because they were neighbors, right? Buddhism and Islam shared a lot of different spaces, Afghanistan being one of them. The Taliban, I think we can all agree, they're the bad guys. They blew up the Buddhas. But then there was this kind of light show thing that happened. I don't know, was it today? It was just recently. So these are very early Buddha statues. They were blown up about 20 years ago, and then they were commemorated just this week. So, okay, so that's in Afghanistan, and then things spread from there. They go across this desert, Taklamakan Desert, very interesting place, as maybe you know. Lots of archaeology happens in deserts, right? Why do you think you can find interesting archaeological remains in deserts? What's special about deserts? Does that make sense to you? Why deserts and not in like rainy monsoon season India? Why are those? Yeah, it's perfect, honestly. And so, whereas things that are like stone, right, carved out of stone and brick and that sort of stuff, of course, that will last in India. But like books, there's a place called Dunhuang. Have you ever heard of Dunhuang? This place? Can I zoom anymore? Come on. Oh, there we go. Has anybody ever heard of this, Dunhuang? Now I'm just sort of going off on tangents, but it's really interesting. So this whole area is full of archaeological sites. Khotan, Nia, Turfan, this whole desert area going over to Dunhuang. Dunhuang's extra special because there are these caves that were sealed off. One cave in particular is called the Library Cave. There were 40,000 manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts that were hidden in this cave, mostly Buddhist material. It's hard to even say which language is predominant. I'm sure there's a statistic somewhere. A lot of Sanskrit, a lot of Chinese, a lot of Tibetan. Some of the earliest writing in the Tibetan language was found at Dunhuang, so a lot of my research is about this place. So these handwritten manuscripts written on paper that, again, the paper itself is over 1,000 years old. They get closed in this cave and then rediscovered like 100 years ago. Now they're all being digitized and people are reading them and comparing them and that sort of thing. So this is kind of the route, is you go this way, you go that way. Why don't people just go straight this way? What's in the way? Why can't you just go directly from India to China? Himalayan mountains, yeah. So that's the Himalayas here. And so this is Buddhism takes this weird route where it kind of goes around across this desert, then into China. It gets to China around the 1st century, like I said, around 2,000 years ago, around the time of Christ, and then also into Korea. Korea became a major center for Buddhism pretty early on, and then mostly from from Korea, it spread to Japan. Although there were people sailing between Japan and China as well. A lot of interesting stories about that too. So that's kind of this other route where you go this big circle all across Central Asia, then finally into East Asia, and then Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam. They're sort of sailing between these various places, exchanging ideas, and then finally the last place is around the 7th century of the Common Era, right? So not that long ago. I mean, it is still a really long time ago. It's over 1,000 years ago, but comparatively speaking, kind of late. A late form of Buddhism comes to Tibet and then ultimately disappears from India. So if we go back to this initial picture, it kind of helps explain this ketchup and mustard drawing that we have here, right? So everything begins in India, spreads across the Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia, goes around, comes into East Asia, and then you get kind of a unique East Asian Buddhism that develops. And then finally, there's this third kind of Central Asian Buddhism that stays in Tibet and also into Mongolia during the Mongol Empire. So maybe you guys know this. Genghis Khan took over the world. You guys know him? Yeah, so he himself did not become Buddhist, but his descendants did. So that was kind of the last hurrah for Buddhism. Is it became really popular in the sort of these steppe empires. So again, to the west, mostly Islam, to the east, mostly Buddhist. How is that described now? People talk about these 3 vehicles. Vehicle might sound like a weird word. It is a bit of a weird word, but it's basically describing a sect, or a even bigger than a sect, like a branch of Buddhism, maybe is a way to put it. Theravada is a word that maybe you've seen before. People talk about Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia. Mahayana is what we're going to talk about today. That becomes popular really throughout the rest of Asia, East and Central Asia. And then Vajrayana. Vajra, we'll talk about all of this in more detail, but Vajra is this like really hard metal. It's almost like a thunderbolt. It represents power. It represents indestructibility. And this is the tantric Buddhism, esoteric Buddhism. There are many different names for it, but the Sanskrit name is Vajrayana. So these are the three vehicles. And basically what we've talked about so far mostly applies for Southeast Asia, this mainstream Buddhism. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same. There are some little nuances that I would change if we were only talking about Theravada, but for most intents and purposes, Theravada tries to represent early Buddhism. There are these reform movements about 100 years ago, mostly under the influence of colonialism, but trying to say, what did the Buddha really teach, right? What is the early original Buddhism? And that's what they try to do in Southeast Asia, although there is a bunch of other interesting stuff happening there. Whereas the Mahayana, this greater vehicle, is kind of new. Maybe you noticed the sutra we have for today. The introduction dates it to the 3rd century, right? So is that a long time after the Buddha's life? If it's the 3rd century of the Common Era, how many hundred years after, give or take, after the Buddha's life? Rough back of the napkin calculation. The Buddha lived 2,500 years ago. This is the 3rd century of the Common Era. Do you guys ever play these numbers? Maybe this is something I learned how to do in grad school, but I have like a timeline in my mind and I like to put things on it, and you can make these interesting comparisons, right? What is happening in I don't know, in Rome in the 3rd century, right? Is Constantine emperor yet? I think not quite. He would become emperor soon though. So how many hundred years? Anybody do this math yet? What's 3rd century BCE, or sorry, 3rd century CE minus 5th century BCE? You're subtracting a negative. 3 minus -5 is, math majors, is that 8? I don't have my glasses. Yes, 8. It's about 800 years. Is that a long time? Is that longer than all of American history? By far, right? Yeah, it's twice as much. So it is a very long time. So if we think about, what is this greater vehicle stuff, even though it's still happening in India, right? This is still coming from India. It's a long time, a really long time after the Buddha's life. And that's why I'm doing this exercise with you. It's because it stretches it out, right? Even though they're talking about the Buddha, the way they talk about the Buddha changes quite a bit. And of course it does, right? 800 years? Everything changes in 800 years, right? It's crazy. It's a very long time. So this is the overview, right? I know I just, again, I gave you a lot of information, but this is basically an overview of all of Buddhist history, right? Are these different movements, and the end result is this, again, ketchup and mustard image that I stole from Wikipedia that kind of represents how Buddhism looks in the world today. So any questions about all of that? Okay, so now let us go into the greater vehicle, right? So we're taking one of these, the yellow one, Mahayana, and we're going to go into some detail about it. So again, if it were up to me, I just translate everything, but the word Mahayana shows up, right? It shows up in this introduction. So I encourage you to, to learn some of these words. The ones that I put on the slides, I encourage you to learn. But if you don't like saying Mahayana, then you can say greater vehicle, and I encourage you to say that too. That'll also be fine. So we have this new approach to Buddhism. How is it new? Well, I'm just going to narrow it down to 3 things. There are more than that, and this is what the Kyoan reading was all about, or at least part of the Kyoan reading was all about this. There's a new practitioner. So this word is probably familiar, right? You guys remember Bodhisattva? What did Bodhisattva mean for us in the life story of the Buddha? Yeah, exactly. And so since we were reading the life story of the Buddha, he was on the path to enlightenment. We called him the Bodhisattva. Now, this idea, it still means that, right? What Sophie just said is still correct for this new version of Buddhism, but it gets spread a bit more widely. Does that make sense? we'll look into this in more detail, but I'll just giving you a little preview right now. It gets spread a little more widely. It becomes more accessible, let's say, rather than just very special individuals like the Buddha or maybe Jesus or someone like that. All of a sudden, you too can become a bodhisattva. And of course, as the greater vehicle, it makes greater promises. There are greater practices. There's, just everything gets amped up. It's like you go to Texas or something. And so there's a new path to enlightenment. I'm glad somebody laughed at that. There's a new path to enlightenment, the 6 perfections. So there was an old path. You guys remember what the old path was? Eightfold path, right? And I didn't make you memorize it or anything. But it was just this middle way, live a good life, do good deeds, say nice things, maybe do some meditation, achieve enlightenment, right? It seemed like a nice package. Now we have a new path. There's a new emphasis. Again, all the old stuff is still there. This is what's kind of tricky about Buddhism and why history matters, right? Because if something comes out before this time, then it's probably this path. If it comes out during this later time, it's probably that path, right? And again, you're not going to have to worry about all of that, but it's just a little glimpse into my world where I have to kind of file these things away and figure out what's going on at each time. So this new path is called the 6 perfections, and we'll look at those too. And then finally, there's a new philosophy, right? We've talked a little about philosophy. Buddhists love philosophy, and I think I like giving you a little taste of it. I feel like if you go too far in philosophy, it can be very interesting if you like philosophy. It can be very boring if you don't. And so maybe some of you are disappointed by my very limited forays into philosophy. But if you're interested in philosophy, I can recommend some other books too. So the greater vehicle really amps this up too, right? What used to be conversations about impermanence, remember impermanence? So that's an important philosophical topic. Things like interdependent origination, which again, I gave you a little taste of. All of that gets amped up for these new ideas about the nature of reality and something they call the middle way philosophy. So rather than the old middle way, there's a new middle way. So lots of new stuff happening. Okay, it's 7:23. I'll keep going for like an hour, right? We end at 9:35. So yeah, plenty of time. Bodhisattvas. So we just talked about this a moment ago. What's new now, right? Again, it's somebody who's on the path to enlightenment. Maybe I'll do some drawing to spice things up a little bit. So I turn this on. That kind of works. Maybe here, brace yourselves. Get all the lights going. Okay, a little hot pink. So I know these boards aren't great, but I'll try to position this so the folks playing at home can see too. All right, so what's the goal of Buddhism? Very simply put, it is Buddhahood, right? It is becoming a Buddha. What does it mean to become a Buddha? Achieve enlightenment, end of suffering, omniscience, all sorts of good stuff, right? There's a lot of interesting things being promised in this Buddha stuff. Can you guys see over there? Yeah, it's very faint. Well, I'll be very animated as I'm drawing. So, okay, so here's the Buddha. Here's us, right? We're at the bottom. And in the lesser vehicle, right, in early Buddhism, we are stuck down here and the Buddha's way up here. And honestly, I don't want to rag on Christianity, or I was ragging on Islam a little bit earlier. I don't want to rag on other traditions too much, but I think this is an important point. When it comes to Christianity, I think something that is often emphasized is that we are very different from God, right? We are fallen. God is divine. It's almost a defining feature of Christianity is there is this line that separates us. There's a boundary, right? We have original sin, and God does it. And of course, the Son of God does it. We are separate. We're bad. They're good. We're sacred. Sorry, we're profane and they're sacred, right? They're all different words you can apply to it. And there's something similar in Buddhism, right? In this early form of Buddhism, we're down here, Buddha's way up there. He's on this path to enlightenment and eventually achieves it. We're lucky if we don't become a little bug in our next life, right? And we're just trying to kind of hold on. With the greater vehicle, that boundary, that separation of us from the divine gets breached, right? There's a line that connects us now. And there are even 10 steps on the line. That might be short one step. I had a couple. There you go. They're called the Bodhisattva grounds. We don't have to necessarily talk about each one, but of course, what's in between here? That is a Bodhisattva. Right? So this is all pretty familiar. What's new is instead of Siddhartha, we can get on this path too, right? It's open and accessible to everybody. So how does it start? How did Siddhartha's path to enlightenment begin? Do you guys remember? Let's say you like what I'm selling, and for 3 payments of $9.99, you too can become a bodhisattva. How did that's a joke, of course, but how did Siddhartha, or his previous life, even before he was Siddhartha, how did he get on this path, the bodhisattva path? How does it begin? It was one of your terms on your review sheet. This is why I make you memorize things. But I didn't necessarily frame it in this way, so it might be hard to remember. Patrick? He made a vow. Excellent. It all starts with a vow. That's a W. And so we can extend that to ourselves. If I want to become a bodhisattva, how do I do it? I take a vow, right? And what does the vow say? I think Patrick just summarized it, is end suffering for all sentient beings, right? There's a term, maybe I'll start writing in the chat. Sentient, have you heard this word before? All sentient beings. What does sentient mean? Are you guys sentient? Yeah, capable of thinking. That's very good. In the Buddhist context, like I told you, I specialize in Tibetan language. The Tibetan word is semjen, which just means you have a mind. It's somebody who is endowed with a mind. So there are very nice ways of framing this vow, where you can say, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, right? It's very specific. Because it's not just, if I wish that you guys are free of suffering right now, you're still committing actions that will cause you suffering later, right? Remember karma and all that jazz? And so there are very specific prayers about happiness and the causes of happiness, suffering and the cause of suffering, and dedicated to all sentient beings. And it feels almost formulaic when I say it, because I've heard it so many times, but this might sound kind of weird to you, all sentient beings. One part of these practices too is thinking about how vast all sentient beings would be, right? Because if you think about how many people are there, I don't know, in New York, is that a big number? Absolutely, right? We're talking millions, tens of millions, depending on where you draw the metro boundary, right? And if we talk all beings in New York, that's innumerable. We wouldn't be able to count them all, would we? No, all the bugs? I mean, let alone all the squirrels and the skunks and the raccoons. You guys ever seen skunks and raccoons around? Around evening, you can find some skunks. It kind of scares the hell out of me whenever I see one. I've not been sprayed, but I've seen many skunks. They seem pretty chill, actually. After a while, I began to think maybe they're not going to spray me. But I don't want to. Don't test them. You know, I feel like you get on the wrong side of a skunk, you'll get in trouble. So this idea of all sentient beings is not even just all humans and animals, right? What are the other kinds of beings available in the Buddhist cosmology? There are 4 others, right? We got humans and animals, which includes bugs and all the other stuff. Where are the other 4? Demigods, as well as gods, right? Those are actually 2 different ones. Ghosts, that was on the exam, right? The ghosts. What's missing? What's the worst one? Hell, yeah, the hell beings. So it's all beings that you can see and the ones you can't see, right? It's like such a big image, like it stretches your mind. And again, that's sort of the point. And so to become a bodhisattva, it begins with this vow, by developing this mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, thought of enlightenment. Kyon calls it the point at which the initial motivation to become a bodhisattva in order to save others arises, right? And so, again, it's this idea of not only I'm suffering, I'm so caught up in my own problems, which of course is valid, but actually this is another tangent that I think is worth going on. I was translating for a Tibetan teacher one time, and somebody in the audience asked a good question, or I thought it was a good question, which was like, how can I, change my what is it? There's this language of self-cherishing, right? Where if you cherish yourself and only yourself, and you worry about yourself all the time and your own suffering all the time, then this is a cause of suffering, right? It's almost like this weird cycle. But this person was asking, like, how can I cherish other people when I don't even know how to cherish myself, right? This idea of self-worth and self-love, which I think is a pretty common issue among many Americans. It's definitely an issue for me, right? Is learning how to sort of take care of myself. But how to differentiate self-cherishing from self-love is actually a pretty interesting yoga trick. It's actually very hard to do. And I think it highlights kind of the complexity of this bodhisattva path. It also maybe shows some similarities between this and that, right? Between Christianity and Buddhism, even though I was saying that they're so very different. This emphasis on altruism, right? You guys know this word? Altruism? Do you know this word? Altruistic? What does it mean to be altruistic?
Is it like caring for others?
Caring for others, yeah, it's very simple. And I would argue that this is a major emphasis in our society, and it's so emphasized that we get burnt out as a result of it, right? When you get this sort of weird, altruistic, capitalistic expectation jumble, you get your soul sucked out, right? And you get burnt out and you have nothing left for anybody else. You got to take care of yourself. So I'm not here to say you all got to sign up for my bodhisattva plan, but there is sort of an interesting, there's an interesting language here, right? Where you, at least the goal is to shift away from this concern for yourself and toward this concern for all others. And again, that's what makes it this greater vehicle, right? Is you're shifting a concern for one person to a concern for all beings, right? All sentient beings. Okay, maybe that's enough of that. Questions? Bodhisattva? How's that sound? Bodhisattva path? Now, okay, how do you do it? I have radical wisdom and compassion here. They show up here as well. The first, well, I guess first I'll say these are the 6 perfections that I mentioned before. If that's not clear, I guess I didn't write it here. But yeah, these are the 6 perfections. Why are they called perfections? Is because each one is a virtue, right? You guys agree with me? Generosity is a virtue. It's good to be generous, theoretically speaking, as long as no one's trying to take things from me. It's good to be generous. Yeah. It's good to be generous, right? And when we talk about the perfection of these virtues, there are actually many stories and many instructions, and to the point where it enters to the realm of the absurd. So generosity, for example, it's good to be generous. It's good to take care of people. It's like if you're having a meal with someone and they want a bite, it's good to give them a bite, right? It's good to let somebody else eat the last slice. It's good to give Christmas presents at Christmas time and that sort of stuff. I think you guys are all familiar with that sort of thing. But this takes generosity kind of to another level. So, for example, there's a story about a past life of the Buddha where he was a prince called Vasantara. And, we don't have to go through all the details, but it's basically a thought experiment. What if somebody was so generous, they would give anything away? Anything. Can you imagine how that might play out? Do you think it's going to be a happy ending? It's kind of a tragedy. It's just absurd. It's totally absurd. So he's this prince. Eventually people learn he's a very generous prince, and so they ask for his kingdom's special elephant, which is like very lucky and protects them and that sort of stuff. And of course he gives it away. And then people get mad at him. They're like, dude, you gave away our special elephant? How dare you? Get out of the kingdom, right? The kingdom kind of tells him to go into exile, which is actually a theme in a lot of stories. But anyway, so he goes into exile. His family comes with him, an evil Brahmin comes over. Remember, I told you the Buddhists would kind of argue and fight with the Brahmins, and so the Brahmins are bad in this story. An evil Brahmin comes over. Of course, Brahmins are part of Hinduism, and he says, "Hey, can I have your children? I heard you're very generous. Can I have your children?" He's like, "Yeah, no problem." He gives away his children, and then finally he also gives away his wife too. And it actually doesn't even stop there. After giving away his wife, a Brahmin comes over. The Brahmin is blind, and he says, "Hey, I hear you giving everything away. Could I have your eyes, right? And then I could use your eyes to somehow magically make my eyes work again." And he does it. He scoops them out, gives them to the Brahmin, and he's blind and alone and by himself out in the woods. And the gods kind of have mercy on him, and there's sort of this magic. Everything goes back to normal ending, right? So everybody's happy. But up until that point, it's a total disaster, right? And there's kind of a fascinating Tibetan movie called The Search, which I watched recently. I'd seen it a few years ago, but I watched it again on some like indie website that if you sign up for a free trial, you can watch it. But yeah, The Search it's by a Tibetan director, and it's basically kind of a riff on the story in modern Tibetan society. It's playing with this question of what does it mean to be that figure, to be Vasantara, Sri Mukundan. So anyways, it's just one of the 6 perfections where you can stretch your understanding of generosity to an utter extreme, right? To a place where there is no bound. There is no limit to your generosity. And of course, this is important in early Buddhism too, right? We talked about lay people being generous. Remember that? How are lay people being generous to the monks and nuns? Giving them food. Yeah, it was the solution to the problem of how do you eat but not be too greedy when you eat, right? Is to rely on other people to feed you. Doesn't really work out when you don't have generosity, does it? So it makes sense that these things that were already there in early Buddhism then get stretched and expanded in incredible ways. Morality, this is just like ethical discipline. It's just learning how to act politely and not speak harshly and that sort of thing. Patience has more, it is patience, like waiting for your friend if they're late or something like that. But also there's a sense of like forbearance, where you're able to carry the weight of a difficult situation, right? If you're in pain, it's being able to withstand the pain. If you're being treated poorly, someone's mistreating you, even abusing you, right? Which of course is, nobody likes that. But there are stories that we will read, in fact, where a teacher abuses a student, and it gets kind of ugly, right? And so these are often lessons in patience. There's a sense like, even if somebody abuses me very badly and I'm like humiliated or put through horrible things, it's very rude and I hate them. There's a sense that this person is teaching me patience, right, according to these practices. So again, not for the lighthearted. There's stories of people like giving up their bodies to tigers and all sorts of horrible things. So, in some ways, these stories are meant to stretch, right? Stretch your sense of patience and forbearance to a breaking point. And so you know your own limits. I don't want to give away my eyeballs. I want to keep my eyeballs, right? So you have to sort of see where your own virtues kind of find their limits. Courage, there's also a sense of dedication, diligence maybe is another word, right? I'm sure you guys are all very diligent and disciplined and excited to be here. But there are limits to your diligence as well, right? If you got an exam, maybe you can grind it pretty hard, but you can't keep this pace up, not for your whole life, right? But here is a practice dedicated to developing those virtues. And then meditation and wisdom. So learning to meditate, reaching deeper states of consciousness, learning to focus, right? There's sort of the mindfulness thing, learning to be able to pay attention, to observe non-judgmentally, but then also a whole bunch of other stuff too. Meditation is a very big topic. We'll talk about that more next week. And then wisdom, of course, is seeing things as they are, right? We talked about impermanence, karma, ethical connections between things, interdependent origination, all of this sort of stuff. So this expands even more, right? And so there's a sense you can really see into the nature of reality, right? That is at least one aspect of wisdom here. So the Bodhisattva path, as you perfect these things, There's a sense that you kind of move up in these levels, right? You get closer to being a Buddha. And of course, the Buddha has perfected all of these things. And then eventually, I guess first, any questions about this? Eventually, what is promised is you stop being just kind of an ordinary bodhisattva, because again, we could just take this vow and boom, bodhisattva, right? But we would still just be ordinary people. We'd still have all these different problems. Our virtues would still have their limits, right? We wouldn't necessarily be of great use to all sentient beings in their pursuit of enlightenment. But eventually, you get higher, higher, higher. You develop skills and virtues and so forth. You get very close, like a step away from becoming a fully enlightened Buddha. But these noble bodhisattvas, these great bodhisattvas, they're called many different things, they stop at the step before final enlightenment. Why would they do that? What happens? What happens at final enlightenment? Was that on the review sheet? The great going out, what is that a euphemism for? The end, right? They're gone. Now, we had a little bit of a philosophical moment where we talked about, is a Buddha gone? Is a flame really gone? Where does the flame go? Asking where a Buddha is like asking where the flame has gone. So it's not to say total non-existence, right? I think people would argue the Buddhas do still exist, but they're definitely not. They're not in a body anymore. Let's just put it that way. They're not in a fleshy body like we are. They're not being reborn and traveling around this circular, cyclical existence like we talked about before. So why would somebody stop here? Stop before what Sophie just described. Stop before this process of cessation. What does this allow them to do, these bodhisattvas? Yeah, stay as a person. And why would they want to do that? What's the value of staying as a person? What do they have access to that maybe a Buddha does not? They could become gods. Why would they become gods? Mm-hmm. There's a sense as people move from, again, being us, maybe you guys are actually secretly bodhisattvas. I'll speak for me. There's a step from me in my very limited capacities. As people move up, karma is no longer pulling them along, right? These figures are deciding when they reincarnate, where they reincarnate. They could become gods. They could go to hell. They could become animals. They could do all sorts of things, right? It's just like the Buddha in his final life, remember? There was this weird tension where he was totally in control and yet he was still learning things, right? That was also on the exam. The teacher was really surprised that he already knew everything and yet he was learning. Like, what the hell is that about? There's something similar happening for these figures. So why would they do that? Why would they become a god? Why would they become a bug? Why would they become a human? What's the point? What's the point of this whole thing? What's the point of life for a bodhisattva? What's the point? What are they trying to do? What did they take a vow to do? For who? For whom? For everyone. Yeah, exactly. Once they take this step into enlightenment, they might end their own suffering. But then what are we going to do? I'm still stuck in the mud. I need some help. Right? And so maybe, again, one of you could be a bodhisattva here to help enlighten me by asking the right question or something like that, right? So again, what are they doing? They're getting to the highest capacity. They have, finished all of their own problems. They're done with their homework. Now they're going to help everybody else with whatever assignments they might have left. That makes sense? And so these bodhisattvas, the difference between a high-level bodhisattva and a beginning bodhisattva, again, is quite vast, right? It goes back to these perfections. They would have perfected generosity to the point where they'd be willing to give up their very own body parts to help people. And of course, real people do that, right? Maybe eyeballs, not so much, but like kidneys. I don't want to donate my kidneys. Sorry, guys. I'm going to zip up my pocket just thinking about that. So who are these bodhisattvas? Well, here's one example. We'll call her Guanyin in this class, and I've already called her a her, so maybe I won't. So Aiden says, spread the idea. Yeah, exactly. So these bodhisattvas, they're almost like these missionaries or something. And when we think about this map that I showed you, all these arrows, all this spreading, who's going to be a good spreader of the good word, right? These bodhisattvas dedicate their lives to helping all sentient beings. They're going to be great missionaries. And we also see this in the Tathagata Sutra, which we can talk about in a moment. So these really high-level beings, though, they basically become like saints is maybe a word that would work in a Catholic school. They basically become like gods, right? They are so powerful. They're so close to Buddhahood. They're so knowledgeable. They know what is going on. They help all sorts of people. And maybe the single most famous example of this is Guanyin, in Chinese called Guanyin, in Japanese called Kanon, in Sanskrit called Avalokiteshvara. Like I said, many other languages too, Tibetan, Cherezi. So this is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And the gender of this figure is confusing. In India and in Tibet, Avalokiteshvara is a he, but as Buddhism spread kind of around the desert and over into East Asia, he became a she, to the point that this sort of later figure, this one's made out of ivory, it's kind of beautiful, is very much a woman, right? But the previous image I was showing you, we can look back very quickly, is kind of androgynous, right? Would you guys say that this is a woman? Probably, maybe, kind of, but not 100% obvious, right? And so this is around the time where he is becoming a she. And again, it's mostly happening in China and in East Asia. So later on, Christian missionaries show up and they start calling this figure the goddess of mercy. And have you ever seen a holy woman holding a little baby before? Is that like a common thing for Christian missionaries? Maybe once or twice? Yeah, it's a pretty common thing, right? So people saw a parallel here. And there's a reason for this. So Avalokiteshvara Guanyin, she has a special island in southeast China. I had the good fortune of visiting. It's called Putuoshan. And it's kind of an interesting place. China is not, I'll put it this way. Buddhism in China is very much tied up with tourism, right? If you go, it's not to say it's not a religious place. I think that's a common misconception. But there's also a lot of like very sort of superficial, taking a picture, maybe doing a little bow, making a little prayer, something like that. But I felt like Putuoshan was a really interesting place, very religious place, a lot of very devout people there. I saw more rituals there than I had seen maybe anywhere. I'm not gonna say anywhere, but then in many other parts of China. And one place I was very busy, it was sort of this back room in this little temple. I was like, hey, what's going on in that back room? And it was this figure. It was Guanyin holding a baby, Songzi Guanyin, and people were praying to Guanyin holding this little baby. What do you think they were praying for? Compassion. Definitely compassion, but it's actually more specific than this. This very particular form of Guanyin was getting a lot of attention. They're praying for, oh, go ahead. Children, exactly. They're praying for children, and specifically male children. Again, I hate to be the misogynist in the room, but there's some misogyny in here too. Do you guys notice the misogyny? We'll come to it. Keep your eyes open for misogyny, and we can start like a misogyny jar where we put in a quarter every time we find some. So yes, praying for children. Even now, right? Even in communist China, right? Where there's this stereotype that people don't have any beliefs there. This is a very common practice, is to pray to Guanyin to have children. No, religion is big in China. It's only getting bigger. There are books being written about this. I even teach a class on religions of China, right? So don't be mistaken about that. Maybe I'll show you a video. I've been talking a lot. We still have a good amount of time before we take a break. Let's watch a video, sort of take a little conceptual break. So here is a life story of a Buddhist master. Actually, make sure, yeah. And so this is his name is Master Sheng Yen. And as you can tell, the story of Master Sheng Yen, guided by Guanyin Bodhisattva, it's in the title, right? Which is why, of course, I was attracted to it, is because it is in the title. But it really is a biography, right? Most of us, this would just be a story of Dr. Bill and his various adventures or something like that. But this is the way that Master Sheng Yen or it's probably his disciples are telling his life story is through this bodhisattva optimized. So here, let's watch and see what role she
的
plays.
小孩与月亮的故事，也是一位法师与观音的故事。故事开始，在一条好长好长的江边，在一个有月亮的晚上。
听到了吗？月亮为什么总跟着我跑呢？
孩子，那是因为我在守护着你。你现在还不明白，但总有一天你会明白的。
Have you guys seen? I don't even know what the source would be, but like the image of like one track of footprints in the sand, and it's like, at first there are two tracks, and God says to his young people, like, hey, this is where we're walking together on the sand, and then the person says, hey, but here there's only one track of footprints. What's happening there? And what is the answer to that question? You guys ever heard of this before? That's where I'm carrying you. Something like that, right? So anyways, when I watch this, it makes me think of that sort of scene. It's a beautiful feeling. I don't know if you guys ever feel this way, but this idea like there's some holy being out there that's looking out for me. Have you guys ever felt this way before? Obviously, it's a result of faith. No question about it, right? This is why people develop faith, or one of the reasons why people develop faith, is it makes you feel safe. It makes you feel protected, right? And so Master Sheng Yen, he goes through some hard times. We're not going to watch this whole thing. And in fact, there are multiple parts. This is part one. I think there's 6. So we're not going to watch all of them. But it's a modern story. It's about a modern Buddhist master. He died about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, not too long ago. And so I just wanted to show you this beginning part. He eventually becomes a monk. And we can learn a bit about his education, because that's sort of interesting. So this would be, I think, in the 30s, because he fights in World War II. So this would be before World War II. So it would probably be like the early 30s, my guess.
读书和学习课诵背经。
大学之道，在明明德。南无普光佛。
So I don't know if you caught it, but a big part of education for a young monk is memorizing sutras. So we just read one for today, and that was probably challenging enough. If we had a more traditional mode of education, you would have to memorize that whole thing word for word. And again, we'll look at it together, but there are so many foreign names in there. It's, again, quite mind-boggling. That first paragraph, did you see how many bodhisattvas were listed off? Unbelievable, right? Unbelievable. And so he has to memorize all these words, and as you can imagine, he's having a hard time with it.
南无普明佛，南无普净佛，南无多摩罗跋旃檀香佛。师父，对不起，我忘了。
去拜观世音菩萨吧，拜了就好了。
是的，师父。
常进。
And so this is a very common mode of practice, right? One is reciting scriptures, right? Reciting sutras, just like the one we read for today. The other, as you can probably see here in the upper left there, is prostrating. Did they use the word prostrate? Bifold. Yeah, prostrating. Do you know what prostrate means? It's different from prostate. Prostate, very different. Prostrate. Does anybody know this word? So I'm not going to do it, but you take your hands, you say some kind of prayer, you touch 3 parts of your body. So your mind, speech, and body, right? Or maybe the other way around, body, speech, and mind. And then put your head on the floor, right? And so if there's an image of Guanyin in the room, it's basically venerating Guanyin, putting her above you, right? It's very similar sort of practice to just bowing down to somebody and praying, as is done across many different religions. Okay, so that's the early part of his life. I wanted to show you one more clip because it's kind of relevant for us. I think it was this one. Was it this one? Maybe it's the next one.
师父，弟子想到南部闭关，在修行上更精进。
So he's a little older there. I think is the next one. He ultimately goes to Japan. He does a PhD on Buddhist studies in Japan, very similar to what I did actually, but it was in Japan, of course. And
为农闭关6年后，圣严法师出关回到中华佛教文化馆，已经在馆房内做好赴日留学准备的圣严法师。
Sorry, one more. Eventually, makes his way to New York.
我们大家在一起，整整做了7天的。
在日本取得博士学位后，圣严法师应美国佛教会沈家珍居士的邀请，到纽约教学与弘法。
Does this look familiar? Have I shown you this picture before? Is it far away from us right now? First day class. Yeah, you guys remember. The weird door, right? The weird circle around the door. Has I already asked you this, but has anybody actually been here? It's about 15 blocks south. Very, very close. Very easy to walk there. And so this master Shengyan, he spent some time here. Let's walk a little more.
并在大觉寺协助处理法务。有一天，2位年轻人走了进来。
So this would be the 1970s. I think it was 78, 79. And so this scene is a little ridiculous, but I want you to.
Shifu, do you know Kung Fu? Yes, I do. What kind of Kung Fu do you know? Tai Chi and Shaolin boxing. But I don't teach the kind of physical Kung Fu often seen in the martial arts movies. I teach people how to use their mind. First, by learning how to calm and settle the mind in order not to get hurt.
Great.
You are exactly the teacher we're looking for.
So there's more about New York and Buddhism in New York. Obviously, you can watch this if you'd like. And then finally, in the end, you know, the Guanyin Bodhisattva keeps showing up. And he eventually establishes a center called Dharma Drum in Taiwan. He grew up in mainland China near Shanghai, but he established a center in Taiwan. And, you know, to show his appreciation for Guanyin, let's see, what part was it? I thought it was earlier than this. Oh, I guess they're still constructing. He created all of these statues dedicated to her, right? So it's sort of a fascinating intermingling of, you know, one man's life with this image of a bodhisattva. And it goes to show that, you know, Buddhism is very much a religion. I think this is something I told you at the beginning of class. This is not just a way of life. This is not, you know, just a philosophy, something like that. This is very much a religion. And even for the highly skilled practitioners, right? The people who are very well versed in philosophy and this sort of thing, they can be some of the most faithful people as well. There doesn't have to be a contradiction there. I'm gonna hit the lights. So questions about Guanyin? How does that sound? Oh, there is a question in the chat. Bronx, that's right. Yeah, it's very close. Now, of course, he's not there. He's not alive anymore. But there are monks who still live there. So maybe when COVID ends, you can go ask them if they can teach Kung Fu. No, what people want to learn now is not Kung Fu, right? We all want to learn mindfulness meditation. And of course, that's what they teach there. Okay, yeah, questions about this? Guanyin? Do you have a pretty good handle on it? So again, a lot of the time there's us down here, there's saints and gods and Buddhas and all that sort of stuff up here. But the whole point of the greater vehicle is kind of giving you tools to cross that threshold, right? Which again, I think are often denied. They're not always given to us, not as freely as we would like. Okay, so beyond this, there are other bodhisattvas. There's this fat Buddha. Have you ever seen the fat Buddha before? And so this is something students often wonder about, and that's why I made this slide, is because now I can tell you about the fat Buddha. He, very simply put, we could call him a bodhisattva. He is framed after this figure, an East Asian figure called Budai. And you can imagine, he kind of takes on this symbol of good fortune. Why do you think he is a symbol of good fortune? What does being fat have to do with good fortune? Boom, right? If everybody's starving around you, being fat is amazing, right? That means you're having a great time and having a great life. So it's not to say everybody was starving all the time in the old days, but people were starving more than they are now, that's for sure. So he became this good fortune figure. It makes sense that he's in Chinese restaurants and Chinese stores, because what's the point of having a restaurant or a store is you want fortune, right? And so he has this big sack of goodies, and sometimes they're like kids crawling on him and stuff. So he just becomes this figure of good fortune, popular mostly in East Asia. Some people call him Maitreya, which I would not call him that, but some people do. It's a Buddha of the future. So one way Buddhists make sense of big catastrophes like what's happening now. You know how everybody's like cursing 2020 and saying how it's the worst year and that sort of thing, you know what I'm talking about? Buddhists would say it's because the blessings of the Buddha are getting further and further away, right? Because the Buddha died 2,500 years ago. And we're getting further and further and further away from his good karma, his good blessings, his help, and his happiness, and his teachings are getting kind of watered down. They're getting translated in all these weird languages like English. And people like me are very poorly trained, and I'm doing a bad job teaching everybody Buddhism. So as a result, we get horrible diseases and all sorts of suffering and that sort of stuff. That's the way people make sense of it, right? Is by saying that we're getting further and further away from the Buddha. So what can we do? Well, we can hope for the Buddha of the future to come, who is still a bodhisattva right now, but will again eventually become a Buddha very soon. And so there's this sense of a Messiah, right? Maybe you've heard of Messiahs before. I guess he was sort of one, right? And not everybody agrees that he is one. So there are, of course, entire traditions who are still waiting for the Messiah. And so Buddhists are waiting for their Messiah. And like other millenarian cults, you don't have to know that word, but people show up throughout history and say, oh yeah, I'm the one you were waiting for. I'm Maitreya. And this has been happening for centuries, right? Very long time ago, there were these big rebellions in different parts of Chinese history in particular, but not only China, where people say, I'm Maitreya, I'm here to lead you all to the promised land. Of course, usually ends in violence. So this is another bodhisattva. There are actually many more. There's a bodhisattva of wisdom. I don't want to overwhelm you. He shows up in the reading. His name's Manjushri. He's very important. So lots and lots of bodhisattvas. And again, at the beginning of the sutra, there's a list of, I didn't count them, but I'm going to say 50. No, probably less than that, 30 or 40. So lots and lots of bodhisattvas. I dare say maybe even infinite, right? There are many, many bodhisattvas. But at the same time, there are a few famous ones that you should know. And this is the most famous one. So you should definitely know this one. The Bodhisattva of Compassion. All right, it's 8:05. Are you guys holding on? We getting tired? Should we take a break? Or should we do 10 more minutes? Can you do 10 more minutes? Let's do 10 more minutes, because I feel like the last 10 minutes when we're getting to 9:30 is like really intense, right? So let's try to do 10 more minutes, and then we'll have an easier time. And we can try to make it to 8:15. So again, we've already looked at this. Buddhism moves around. A very important figure in the movement of Buddhism is King Ashoka. Let's see. Yeah, we can start with him. So he lived a long time ago. Does he live pretty close to the time of the Buddha? How many years after the Buddha did he live? So again, we've got it here. The 3rd century before the Common Era, which is just the same way of saying before Christ. How many years? This one's very simple math. -5 minus -3. Maybe -1. maybe I'm setting up the math problem. But yeah, it's just a couple centuries, right? He comes very short amount of time after the life of the Buddha. And so when people try to tell the historical story of the Buddha, I think somebody asked a question about this before, like, how much do we really know about the Buddha, like his historical reality? Well, a lot of it goes back to this figure. Why does he matter? It's because he took over all of India. He was a very powerful king. Have you guys heard of him before? King Ashoka? He's the one with the pillars. We did talk about him before. Very good. Yeah, so he took over all of India, very bloody, very violent. Actually, there's a little part of South India he did not take over, but everything else he took over. Very bloody, very violent. And just like Constantine, again, before Constantine, he did it before it was cool, he had kind of a conversion moment where he thought, I don't want to be bloody and violent anymore. In fact, I'm going to be a vegetarian and I'm going to practice Buddhism because Buddhism's cool. Without him, Buddhism would be some weird hippie movement that you would never hear about. But because of him, it became this universal religion practiced all over India and eventually all over the world. And just like Sophie remembered, there are these pillars where he writes these testaments. He carves them into stone. And so there's some of the earliest examples of Buddhist writing in the world. Because again, they're over 2,000 years old, right? And they're carved in stone, so they stick around. So very powerful king. He spreads the relics of the Buddha all over India. We talked about relics before too, so people can visit these relics, get the blessings of the Buddha, and basically establishes Buddhism as a universal religion throughout South Asia at least. So very powerful, very successful guy. You might remember there's a prophecy in the life story of the Buddha. He might become a religious teacher. He might become a wheel-turning king. Remember this? He might go one way, he might go the other. Well, he was the wheel-turning king, right? He became the universal emperor, the powerful king who ruled all over South Asia. Because of him, missionaries get sent all over the place. We basically already talked about this, but they basically go all over this map, like we talked about before. For him, it's kind of stretching Southeast Asia. Shortly after him, it keeps going deeper and deeper into Central Asia, and then finally around to China. In terms of representation, it's kind of interesting that it's not an art history class, but we've looked at a lot of art. Can you tell what's going on here? So we've got, what is this? A tree. Have we seen trees before in the life story of the Buddha? Can you tell what these guys are? What does it look like they're doing? They kind of look like they're attacking. It's a little hard to tell because it's all broken and stuff, right? He's got like a sword. They seem to have like a war elephant here, right? Have we seen weird demon-looking guys attacking trees? Something kind of like that, right? Wasn't Keanu Reeves doing that? So what is this moment depicting? Yeah, the battle with Mara, right? The battle with the demons. But something's missing. I can't quite put my finger on it. What's missing for this picture? The Buddha is missing. Isn't that weird? We have this scene where we can recognize it from the life story of the Buddha, but the Buddha's not there. It's just this empty throne. It's an empty chair. Kind of bizarre, right? So in early Buddhist art, the Buddha was generally not depicted. They wouldn't draw his form. And we can speculate as to why, right? It's kind of an interesting question. I don't have an answer for you, so we don't have to necessarily do that. I think one reason is he wasn't really a human. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a human. He's not here anymore, right? And so there was a sense of they didn't know how to depict him, right? Almost like the iconoclasm of certain other religions. so that, yeah, here's this demonic assault on an empty throne. Again, it's from that sort of northwestern part of India, very old, carved into stone. And so originally there are just these symbols: a tree, a wheel, an empty throne, and then eventually there's a shift to depict him as a human, right? And there are also these stupas where his relics were put, right? Those mounds of bricks and various other materials. And so then there were relics kept inside of those. Eventually, though, we get the Buddha that we know and love, and he takes on these sort of more human-looking characteristics. His hands can do all sorts of stuff. We've already talked about his hand touching the earth witness mudra. So his hand gestures are called mudras. If you ever go to an art museum, you'll probably learn about mudras. And yeah, there are various characteristics: the bump on his head, the elongated ears. This hand position is I think this is the turning the wheel of the doctrine mudra when he puts his hands together like this. It's a little bit low, and I can't quite tell what his fingers are doing. The other famous one is the earth witness one that we've seen many, many times. And so, yes, there are these characteristics that develop. So as Buddhism spreads, so does Buddhist art, so do these Buddhist icons, and you get various different depictions of the Buddha. But these core characteristics, the hand gestures, the long ears, the bump on the head, all of that remains the same for the most part. Okay, now I think we can take a break. Any questions about all this sort of stuff? Again, bottom line is Buddhism spreads far and wide beyond South Asia and into East Asia, Central Asia. And as it goes, it kind of becomes a new religion, right? One based on these bodhisattvas and this open path to enlightenment that's open to everybody. Okay, let's take a break. Reconvene at 8:30. Intermission. Zoom record. Hi, everybody. How was the break? You feel like the break is too long or too short, or just right? Too short? You want more break? 15 minutes is a long time. Say again. It's not long enough? It is enough? Okay, it is enough. Yeah, I thought it was enough. I feel rested. I ate an orange. I feel like I got my blood sugar up or something. I don't know. I feel like the question of how to do this class and also feed myself and also not drink too much caffeine and fall asleep tonight is still something I'm trying to figure out. I'm on the end of not enough caffeine. I've not had any caffeine this afternoon, but I still feel pretty good. All right. Any questions about the stuff we just talked about? How does that all sound? Is this side of Buddhism weird and surprising, or do you think it's cool and interesting? A little bit of both. So there's one danger. I don't even know if this will mean anything to you. There's one danger to think about Buddhism as somehow like getting corrupted. You know what I mean? It's like if we look back at this map, there's like a true original Buddhism, and then it gets corrupted as it spreads out. Have you heard this way of thinking? Like maybe Jesus had some true original teaching, and we just found that, and we know the real way to live, but it's been corrupted over the ages. And of course, that, as I've already said, is an old idea, right? It's an old idea that the Buddha taught the real way that Buddhism is supposed to be, and then it becomes more corrupted as time goes by. But I would say that's false. You know, basically everything that shows up in the greater vehicle is just a little bit of a shift. It's a little bit of change. There's very little new things being added, like completely and utterly new things. It's just more a difference of emphasis, right? Some things are expanded, again, just made bigger, right? This greater vehicle, it's made greater. It's pumped up a notch, right? They take it up to an 11 or whatever you want to say. And so the one piece, I guess I can go back to my table of contents. We've talked about bodhisattvas. We've talked about 6 perfections. The one piece we haven't talked about yet is this middle way philosophy. So why don't we do some of that? So here is Well, I guess first of all, on the image here, it's the Heart Sutra. And the Heart Sutra it's technically a perfection of wisdom sutra, right? And we talked about the perfection of wisdom a moment ago. So these are some of the most famous sutras. Just so we're clear, I'm saying the word sutra, S-T-U-R-A, and a sutra is a Buddhist scripture, but people often just say sutra. So the Heart Sutra is one of the most famous Buddhist scriptures. I thought about making you read it. It's just like a page long, so it felt like kind of awkward. Assigning that as a reading, you open it and then you're basically done as soon as you start. But it's about this middle way philosophy. So it's perfection of wisdom. What is this middle way all about? We talked about the middle way before is more of an ethical idea, right? What was the middle way we talked about before? It's a middle way between two extremes, right? What were those two extremes that it's a middle way between? Between what? Being a Buddha and being a person? That's an interesting one. That's not exactly how I would put it. Sophie? Yeah, remember the life story of the Buddha? Beginning of his life, very comfortable, and maybe we could say that's sort of like us. That sort of makes sense to me. I'll have to think about your comment. It's an intriguing one. But then the asceticism thing is not the Buddha, right? Asceticism is also too extreme. The Buddha reels it in from that, right? And he ends up in the middle way. So again, it just if there's one moral of the life story of the Buddha is too much pleasure is not good, too much asceticism is not good. You got to find something in between, and you guys already knew that, right? That's how you live your lives. Is a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of work, a little bit of fun, work-life balance, all this sort of thing. Now we have a new middle way. Similar logic, right? You've got two extremes, except it's talking instead about the nature of reality. So what the hell am I talking about? So one extreme, which is the extreme we usually exist in, is to just think things exist the way that they appear to exist. This is how you guys generally live your lives? Of course you do, right? That's how everybody lives their lives, unless you're really into this sort of stuff. You know, a chair is a chair, a table is a table, a person's a person. I'm just Dr. Bill, you know, late night Buddhism professor. So that's one extreme. Maybe I can even use the board for this. So one way to talk about this extreme is we can give it an ism, right? We had asceticism for before. We can call this absolutism. That can be one side of our spectrum. We can go left to right here. Just in case you guys are feeling left out, I'll write it in the chat too. Absolutism. So what does this mean? It's just things exist as they seem to exist. Things are just what they are, right? But we've already talked about how for the Buddhists, that's not the case, right? Why are things actually not always really existing the way they appear to exist? What is faulty about the way things appear to exist? You guys wake up this morning and brush your teeth and remind yourselves that you're going to die one day? It's not a bad practice, to be honest. Unless it gets you down, then maybe don't do that. But it can light you up too at the same time. So yeah, what is faulty about the way we usually seem to see things? What is faulty about the way in which things appear to exist? Yeah, so if you guys couldn't hear, Aiden said the same thing. Impermanence, exactly. So Sophie used the example of the school, kind of an interesting one, right? We're in a very old building. I think it was established in the 40s, right? There's a little like plaque at the bottom of the building. I'm not sure if that's like when it was built or what, but pretty old building, right? We got people getting kicked out and come back in. So yeah, and Sophie's saying, even though this building, we've been in it probably dozens, if you're upperclassmen, maybe even hundreds of times, right? Actually, almost definitely, right? I guess it depends on how often you have classes, but you've been in this building many, many times. It seems like it doesn't change, but does it change? Yes, it does. Absolutely. You might not notice it change. It might last longer than you do. It's kind of an interesting question. Will it last longer than you will? But the day will come when this building goes away. The more kind of interesting one is yourself, right? You are always changing. Have you ever looked at pictures of yourself when you were a little kid? Of course. Do you look anything like yourself now? Maybe a little bit, but your body is constantly changing. Your skin flakes are constantly coming off. Your hair is growing and you're cutting it. Your nails are growing and you're cutting it. Everything is changing all the time. You are a dynamic being, right? And yet when we look at ourselves, we don't see ourselves that way, right? Maybe sometimes a little bit. Got a haircut, look a little bit lighter, something like that. But most of the time we just think, I'm me and this is how I am and this is how I always will be. This is one extreme. You guys with me so far? So what would the other extreme be? What do you think is the opposite of this point of view? To an extreme, right? Just in the same way that you can take asceticism to an extreme. What do you think would be the false opposite of this? I don't think I've told you this word yet. You don't have to know the word, but even just the concept. If this is saying that things exist just simply the way they appear to exist, what would the opposite of that be? Is it too late to be talking deep philosophy stuff? Here's a word. Nihilism. Have you guys heard of this word? It looks like nihil. I've taught this word before, and I realize when I say nihilism, people don't know how to spell it. But it looks like nihil. Nihil is a Latin word. Does anybody know what nihil means in Latin?
It means nothing.
It means nothing. Was that Stephen? Okay, yeah, thank you, Stephen. It's nothingism. So it's a pretty simple formulation, right? Do you see what the two extremes are now? Things exist and they just simply exist. Things don't exist. Those are the two extremes. It's kind of simple when you think about it. But applying this is another question, right? Now, what do you think the middle way would look like then? What's in between those two extremes? Mere simple existence and utter non-existence. What's in between those two extremes? Well, first of all, we need to throw out each of these, right? So we're going to throw out the idea that things don't exist. Do you guys agree with me? Do things exist? Do you guys exist? You ever feel like you don't exist? Maybe sometimes, but that's wrong. You do exist. And I'll tell you why. There is no nothing. Nothing is not a thing. It doesn't exist. And you do exist. Show me nothing. Even this is air. This is something. It's space. Space is something too. There is no nothing. Nothing, by definition, does not exist, right? So this is not an option. You are something. You do exist. Now, you might not exist quite as solidly as you think you do, right? As you appear to exist. So that feeling of maybe I don't exist is kind of bouncing between these two things. And the Buddhists want you to stay right in the middle. Between, oh, I'm young and strong and healthy and I will be this way forever, and maybe I just don't exist at all, right? There is a space in between. It's just sort of hard to find. And again, maybe you can imagine there is a lot of literature about this topic. The term we're discussing right now is emptiness. Have you ever heard this term before? Emptiness. So So again, emptiness is not nothingness, right? Empty is something, it just means it's empty of this absolute existence, right? So I'll read some Kyon for you. The true status of phenomena is something midway between existence and non-existence, right? That's very simply what we're talking about. This is existence, this is non-existence, and the true status of things is somewhere in between. And I hate to say it, but I think, again, in line with that impermanence conversation, there's quite a bit of truth to that. Another way to put it, emptiness is the absence of inherent existence. This idea like I exist inherently from my own side, like there's some special mayonnaise covering me that is Bill. If you look for that mayonnaise, where is Bill? Can I find him? Is he in my arm? Is he in my brain? Is he in my eyeballs? You're probably not going to find him. That's the bet that the Buddhists make, at least, is this idea of inherent existence. Again, that'd be this side, is an illusion, right? It's an extreme. It's false. The ultimate truth of all phenomena, according to Nagarjuna and these other figures, is this emptiness, is this space in between. I would argue emptiness is actually kind of on this half. It's moving toward nihilism to the point where it kind of feels like nihilism sometimes. So maybe I'll put emptiness here. Where it's still in the middle, but it's a little on the nihilism side. And so if you're into nihilism and you think it's kind of interesting, look into emptiness. You might enjoy it. If emptiness or if nihilism scares you, maybe emptiness isn't for you. There is another thing we're going to talk about today, which is closer to absolutism. Can anybody guess what that might be? What is it? Wholeness. Interesting. What is wholeness talking about? The opposite of emptiness? Oh, I get it. That's pretty good. Buddha nature. Tathagata. That sutra I made you guys read, that's the other side of this, that's getting closer to things sort of just existing from their own side. So these are two tools that the Buddhists play with, right? If you feel like you need to be taken down a notch, you can play with emptiness and think about how the things you're really holding on to, you love and can't let go, are empty, right? And don't necessarily exist in the way that they seem to. But if you're feeling a little down and out and kind of not sure where to go with yourself, and you feel like you're floating out in space like Sandra Bullock in that movie, what was that movie called? Gravity. Yeah, exactly. A little Buddha nature will bring you back down to earth. It's kind of a fascinating twin set of tools. Let's do Buddha nature, because I feel like we've talked long enough. There are interesting implications of this, right? Maybe I'll just say, well, let's do Buddha nature. I think it'll highlight the same idea. All right, so I've been kind of leading us up to this for a long time. We finally got our Tathagata Sutra, and maybe I'm gonna force you guys to talk to each other for a little while. I know you're probably groaning mentally as I'm saying this, but I will say this. This is a reading that is pretty easy to discuss, even if you've never looked at it before, because I know you have a bunch of midterms and stuff. Once you get past the first couple pages, it is very easy to understand. So this is what I want you to do with your classmates, is to get past those first few pages and figure this out. So I'm going to give you a little intro. So I'm not cutting you loose yet, but get ready. If you need to open up some files or whatever, open them up. I'm going to cut you guys loose in a little while. So I guess, first of all, Tathagata. Again, you might be groaning. It's like, why are you making us learn this word? Because it's all over the reading, so we must learn it. It's a pretty common word, honestly. It's a good word to know. If you take a Buddhism class and you don't learn the word Tathagata, I'm probably not doing my job. So it's a word you should know. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful. Why don't we say it? The TH, it just means it's like aspirated. So it's not tha, it's just Tathagata. How about I'll say it and then you guys say it, all right? Tathagata. 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 Yeah, pretty good. So that's the first word. It literally means one gone thus. It's an epithet for the Buddhas. What is an epithet? You guys know this word? I'm just full of words today. I guess I'm full of words every day. It's a name for someone, right? This is adjective or descriptive phrase. Yeah, an epithet, term of abuse. Yeah, so it's a descriptive phrase describing the Buddhas. So what does thus mean? Well, it's that emptiness, Buddha nature, middle way state of existence, right? The Buddhas have gone to this place and they stay there. Most of us get stuck here. And maybe we try real hard, we'll get stuck here. It's very hard to exist in this space in between. So the Tathagata is the one gone thus, the Buddhas, the ones who have figured out enlightenment. Garbha is a harder word. It has the sense of like covering. Okay, so it could be the thing that is covering something else, like a womb, or it could be thing that is being covered, like an embryo, right? It could be the thing, the shell, or it could be the seed. And so Tathagata Garbha is basically talking about how everybody has this Buddha nature, this Tathagata nature inside, but it's covered. What is it covered by? Maybe I can ask you that when I cut you loose. So there are all these metaphors that come into play. I can even list them off for you. Actually, no, I can make this sort of a scavenger hunt. I'll just give you a little glimpse. There are 9 metaphors. Here's what I want you to do. When I break you out into groups, I want you to look for the metaphors, okay? And be able to explain at least one of them. And I'll give you enough time so you can actually compare some of them too. So find the metaphors. Can you do it? So again, just a preview, there are metaphors of covering and things at the core, and it is a metaphor for this concept of Buddha nature. All right, so I'm going to ask you, what are the metaphors and how do they illustrate the concept of Buddha nature? Are you guys ready? Start your engines. All right, here we go. We're going to do this. I know it's late, but we're all the insane people who... Okay, we're back, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the metaphor party. All right, so was I lying to you? Was it easy to find metaphors? There were a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't lying. I'm a very honest professor most of the time. No, not all the time, most of the time. The beginning's kind of tough. Will you guys agree with me? The beginning's kind of tough. There's a big list of names, and you know, if I'm just like casually reading this on 94, I hit that big list of names. I'm like, oh baby, that's a lot of names, right? So what do you do when you're reading a sutra and you hit a list of names that is quite literally like 30 or 40 names long? Do you read every single name? There you go, you CSV it. That is the true solution here. Or you just skip over it, right? I mean, I hate to encourage laziness, but in this case, you say, okay, Bodhisattva, harmonious wisdom, very interesting. And these are all Bodhisattvas. Okay, well, we're going to skip down to the end of the Bodhisattva list. But once you do that, you actually get kind of an interesting story, or what I would call an interesting story, at least. So that's when you get the metaphors, right? So what did you guys come up with? What kind of metaphors did you find? Why don't I bother the chat? I've been bothering people in this room a lot. Chat, what did you guys come up with? Metaphors? Come on, you have.
Yeah, we did
Oh, go ahead.
we did the our group breakout group 2 did the one on treasure and
Okay.
like being covered in like gross stuff. And how it pretty much is like the self is like the gold or treasure, and the gross stuff all on the treasure was like negative emotions, like what is it called, like desires, sort of like the what was the word that we used before? It was like thirsts or something, cravings.
Craving, yeah. Yeah, the word that gets used here is another tricky word, is klesha. And so it's another, you know, it's one issue studying Buddhism is there's a ton of words getting thrown at you. But this word shows up again and again and again. And I like the way Stephen explained it. Maybe he saw it from the slides, right? There are these negative emotions. Negative emotions. All right, so maybe we can put it together. Steven, do you got a page that you want to point us to? What page were you looking at?
I think it was 98. It was the fourth of the 9 like metaphors.
Very good. And you almost definitely saw the number 4 from the slides, right? So we got this gold and filth. Very good. And maybe you guys can see I put the number 4 there, right? I had to go through, figure out these numbers to share it with you guys. And that's what we were talking about in the back, right, Kevin? We were talking about gold and the filth. What is special about gold, Kevin? What did we talk about? It doesn't rust. You guys know this about gold? Even silver tarnishes. Are you aware of this, right? If you ever have like silver cutlery, it might tarnish. You can clean it and fix it and make the tarnish go away. But gold doesn't do that. Gold is special. Gold doesn't rust, it doesn't tarnish. And so if you put gold in nasty filth, what does it say? We've got, or good sons, it is like genuine gold that has fallen into a pit of waste and been submerged and not seen for years. What do you think waste is talking about? You had to guess. What do you think waste is referring to? When gold is submerged in impure waste. Are you guys being polite and you just don't want to say it, or do you really not know? It's probably shit. That would be my guess. Because back in the day, there's no indoor plumbing, right? You just go where you got to go. And sometimes there are piles of stuff, and sometimes your gold falls into a pile, apparently. What an image, right? What an image. You have the image now? Gold covered in shit? All right, we got the image. It's there, good. What does this have to do with Buddha nature? And I think I cut Stephen off before he could get there. Stephen, you want to continue? What does this have to do with Buddha nature? As you're thinking, I'll keep reading. If you get it out and wash it clean, you may do with it as you will, which causes their relatives and family to all rejoice. So all you got to do is fish it out and clean it up, and then it's all yours. Does that make you guys rejoice? It make me rejoice. All right, Stephen, have you abandoned us? He's abandoned us, folks. All right, I got to rely on you guys then. So what does this image have to do with Buddha nature? I even have a slide. Look, gold. You get it out, wash it clean. Family will rejoice. There are others too. Treasure. It's like a buried treasure stored under the earth, and it's compared to under the house of an impoverished man, right? So imagine I'm a poor professor who doesn't get paid enough, which is not very far from the truth, but underneath my house, which presumably I own, even though I'm poor, there's some sort of treasure buried underneath, but I don't even know it's there. How ironic. How ironic. Or there's another golden statue. Actually, there's a ton of golden statues. It makes you wonder if these are just kind of a composite of a bunch of different stories that are floating around. But number 7 is it's wrapped in worn out rags, right? It's like a golden statue that has this nasty wrapping around it. So what's the point? What's the point of these golden filth metaphors? What is this pointing to? What's the takeaway? Is it just sort of hilarious? It's kind of hilarious.
Is it that like everybody has this sort of like treasure within them, but they don't know it because they're so wrapped up in other things?
Okay, I like that. We all have this treasure inside of us, but it's wrapped up in other things. Why don't we look at the first one? The first one is probably the most clear. Did anybody talk about the flower metaphor? Gold is bad. No, gold is good. Misogyny. See how I found this misogyny? Yeah, the ugly woman. Exactly. All right, let's look at the misogyny one. So that's toward the end, right? Again, I made a list for you. Pregnant woman is number 8. So that's on page 101. Let's check it out. It is like a woman who is impoverished, vile, ugly, and hated by others, who bears a noble son in her womb. Ooh, what an image. What an image. Now, of course, when we compare this to the gold one, it's quite clear, right? How is the woman being portrayed here? as a husk, as a shell. What did Ciara say? Vile, as they throw in ugly women, dirty rags, excrement, useless husk. Yeah, they use the word husk, don't they? So there's a sense like she herself is useless, but she has something valuable inside of her. Why don't you tell me what you really think, you Buddhists? Right? And you see something quite similar in the birth of Siddhartha. Remember? Right? The womb is seen as tainted. He has his palace that he builds up to make him, untainted by the scene. That's why I had this image of his mom giving birth to him. Now, I think it is my job to defend Buddhism a little bit. Not all women are depicted as ugly, what do they call it? Impoverished, vile, ugly, and hated by others. Just some women are vile, ugly, and hated by others. So it's not saying all women fit this description. It's just some of them. But yeah, even so, it is. This is the misogyny button that I saw earlier as well. Other thoughts on this? Good call, Sarah. And just to be clear, Aiden, gold is good. Gold is not bad. Gold is great. It has this idea of value, right? It's something of value that is covered by something kind of gross and of less value. Again, plants and food. It's like separating the wheat from the chaff, the kernel from the husk, right? So sometimes seeds that we can eat are covered by husks that we cannot eat. And in order to get the delicious inside, we have to take off the outside, almost like a sunflower seed. You guys ever eaten those before? It's very kind of time consuming, but it's sort of fun, right? I don't know if you guys have ever done this. It's very common in China. You get a big bag of sunflower seeds and you're just hanging out with your friends and you just eat it. You just kind of crack them, eat it, put it down. Get another one, crack it, eat it, put it down. It's a good time. Have we hit the nail on the head yet? What is this? What's the point of all these metaphors? The very beginning scene. Let me set the scene for you guys. They're all hanging out, right? There's that big list of names that we skipped over because there are too many of them. And they're chilling. The Buddha starts making some miracles, right? Just like we saw Gautami do. The Buddha can do it too. He makes some miracles. And then we see 1,000-petaled lotus flowers. Have we talked about lotus flowers before? We have, right? But this isn't any old lotus flower. This has 1,000 petals, as large as chariot wheels. Kind of unbelievable. So these incredible flowers open up. Inside of each flower is what? A conjured image of a Buddha. Spectacular, right? And again, when this all becomes an illusion, right? The way that things seem to exist to us, when that all becomes an illusion, there's a lot of room for manipulation, right? Virtual reality and that sort of stuff. So we see something like that happening here. All these amazing flowers pop up with Buddhas inside of them. It's spectacular. And then what happens? I'm reading the bottom 94, top 95. What happens to the flowers? What is the gross exterior? Remember, because that was the theme, right? You have the good thing on the inside and the bad thing on the outside. What happens to these flowers? Yeah. The flowers wither in an instant, and then they start decaying and they become stinky and disgusting. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? But what is inside of them? The Buddha. So there's still a Buddha inside. It's just they're covered by something gross, right? And so this is the metaphor. Yeah, so the bottom of that page, 95. So the Buddha gives this amazing display, and then everybody's like, hey, what's the deal, Buddha? Why are you giving us this weird display? And he's like, let me tell you. And at the bottom of 95, he says, the innumerable conjured Buddha images with their many adornments, now I'm at 96, seated in lotus positions with the flowers, who cast forth light so exceedingly rare that there was no one in the assembly who did not show reverence. In a similar fashion, good sons, when I regard all beings with my Buddha eye, I see hidden within the kleshas of greed, desire, anger, stupidity, there is seated augustly and unmovingly the Tathagata's wisdom, the Tathagata's vision, and the Tathagata's body. And it goes on. And so what is the point here? Do we have to work super hard and be good boys and girls so maybe we have a shot at becoming enlightened one day? Is enlightenment somewhere far away, far, far over the hill, and we're stuck in this hell realm of samsara? No. Enlightenment is here. Enlightenment is now. Enlightenment is a place on earth, baby. How's that song go? Heaven is a place on earth? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, that's right. So you know. This might feel a little bit quaint right now. It's like, okay, cool story, Buddha, whatever. But this is a very important image, actually, because what we've been learning so far is that you do have to grind. You do have to hustle. You do have to think and strategize and be careful and be vigilant. Remember vigilance, right? That was on the exam too. And actually, we should talk about the exam in a couple minutes. We'll do that in a little bit. Be vigilant. Watch out. The world's a dangerous place. You might be suffering if you're not careful. And then, of course, the implication is if you are suffering, it's your own fault because you weren't careful enough, right? This is saying something very different. Very different. It's saying everything you need is already here. Enlightenment is within you, right? And you're covered by all this bullshit, sure. Suffering, absolutely, it's here, no doubt, right? We're not going to pretend like it's not there. Withered flowers, stinky, dying, nasty petals, whatever. Filth, right? We talked about excrement a moment ago. Yeah, that's there, no doubt. But it's saying inside of that, something a bit more fundamental, right? Again, we're getting toward the side of things do exist, you do exist. How do you exist? You exist in an enlightened way inside of all of you, right? And so again, with this bodhisattva plan of enlightenment, there's a sense like, again, we're down here, Buddha's up here, we're trying to help all beings achieve enlightenment. This makes enlightenment possible. Nobody is damned. Nobody is going to be left out, right? The seed of enlightenment, maybe it's not ripe yet, maybe it hasn't fully matured yet. Some of these, they still need to grow, right? So like this one, the mango tree, hasn't grown yet. It's the potential is there, but it hasn't grown yet. Others, it's already formed, right? You just have to find it. So actually, there's a slightly different connotation for each metaphor. But I think you probably get the point now, right? There is almost like a true self being portrayed here. And what is the true self? It's enlightenment, Buddhahood. That's what's really real. All the suffering stuff, it's just on the outside. It's not real. It's just extra, right? It's a thin veneer over what really matters. And so this is, again, maybe I'm splitting hairs here. It's kind of at odds with the idea of emptiness. Would you agree with me? I see some heads nodding. Emptiness is denying existence, right? It's like you peel back the layers of bullshit and it's just not there. It just doesn't, there's nothing there. These guys are saying, actually, there is something there. Enlightenment is there, right? Kind of a minor difference, but they pull you in different directions, right? This one is helping you take things apart, right? Again, peel back the layers of bullshit. And again, it is useful in doing this. The bodhisattva of wisdom has a sword that is on fire. And you can maybe imagine why. It's for cutting through all of the crap. But then this one, I think, often gets left out because a lot of folks like to move in this direction of nihilism. Maybe you can tell from the way I teach this class, I actually like to push us in this direction of a way of existing that is perhaps more desirable rather than the choice of just taking it all away. So, it's my class. I get to emphasize things the way I want to. So anyways, we'll come back to this. So please store this away, this idea of Buddha nature, because this is utterly key for developments like Tantric Buddhism and even more so for Zen Buddhism. This is like a core concept for Zen. So we'll see this again. Any questions? Buddha nature, how's it sound? Good? All right. Let's talk about the exam. Now that I've got you guys all aware of your incredible potential, all the things that you can be, let me kind of shoot you down a little bit. No, you guys actually did very well on the exam. If you haven't seen yet, you can access your grades. Here are anonymous grades. The N, if you know statistics, you know there were 44 people who took the exam. So this is 2 classes put together, 44 people. About half of them got A's. So again, from an exam design standpoint, this was probably too easy. I know you guys were complaining it was too hard, but just statistically speaking, if half the people getting A's is too easy, if the median is 89, that's pretty good. It's a little high. The mean is pretty low though, right? And why is the mean low? It's because some people just weren't on the bus, right? I don't mean to pour salt in anybody's wounds or anything, but you know, it was a timed test, and if you get to the end and you don't have any time left, then you're kind of out of luck. And that's what happened to some people. So clearly some folks are going to need to figure out how to take this exam. There was a question earlier, is the next exam going to be similar to this first one? Yes, it is, right? And so this is something you can work on, right? You can think about what skills were tested in this exam. What did I need to do for these quotation explanations? What did I need to do for these short essays? How did I read in the long term, right? And how did my reading and all the work that I did leading up to the exam pay off, right? What did I do in the short term? Did I prepare my notes? Did I download all of these slides? Did I download all of the readings? Because if I didn't, I was basically not giving myself a chance, right? Because then I'm just kind of screwed and scrambling during the exam. So obviously these are skills that really come down to you. So I'm happy to discuss these sorts of strategies with you, right? If there are things like you're wondering how to do something better, obviously I'm your teacher. This is where I can help you. But in the end, you know, I can kind of lead you to these skills, but I cannot give them to you. So this is something you can think about. If you got a grade you didn't like, again, here are more detailed statistics. 7 A pluses, so that means 98 or above, 7 people. 9 A's, 4 A minuses, 3 B pluses, 8 B's, 2 B minuses, 3 C's, 3 C pluses, and 4 folks D's and F's. So pretty, you know, again, from a design standpoint, pretty good spread, as they say. Lots of A's. I think, I hate to say it, but I'd like to sort of reel that in a little bit, and then obviously get these folks back on the bus, because, you know, there's still room to get back on the bus. If there are no questions, are there questions about this kind of stuff? If there are no questions, we can look at the exam, shall we? Let me log in real quick. And I went over this with the other class, and I was a little more spirited about it. I'm sort of over it now because feels like a long time ago. But I did all the grading over the weekend. And so it was very much in my head. Wait, let me do this. How do I? Oh, I think I had to have done it before. All right, let me open it for the other class. This is confusing because I need to do a preview in order to look at the questions. Yeah, there's my preview. All right, let's review the preview. Okay, here we go. So I'll just go through these one by one. We've got 13 minutes, so that's plenty of time. I'll skip over the ones that are easier, but I can tell you the ones that people missed. This one was a little challenging. It's an oldie but a goodie. You know, we covered this early on. It's the Buddha, right? I think almost everybody got that. But this question was almost hilarious to see you guys squirm, right? Because so many people, like, again, let me read it to you. Give an example that demonstrates how one acts through the mind, right? So what I'm asking is, how do you act with your mind? Pretty simple question, right? But some people are just like, I can't make an example out of this. I have to say, you think and then you act. I have to say it that way, right? And so even though it's very clearly saying, give me an example of acting with your mind. So many people are like, well, you think and then you act with your body, or you think and then you act with your speech. And I was saying, no, thinking is acting. And that's why I made this question, because I knew a lot of you would squirm. Thinking is acting. I'll say it again. Thinking is acting. Thinking is acting. Even though it's maybe not a productive activity, you can't market your thoughts, although arguably that is sort of what happens with cookies and whatever. Thinking is acting, right? So how is thinking, acting? A good example was judging someone, right? A lot of people wrote judging someone. And so, of course, when you get on your phone and you're on Instagram or whatever, that's often what we do. And in fact, there's a whole system built around that. You give it a like, you write a little comment, whatever. Judging someone is a way of thinking. But any sort of thought, right? Thoughts lead to other thoughts. And the more you think in a certain way, the more you will continue thinking that way. And the more you act using your mind in a certain style, the more you will continue to act in that style. So anyways, it's maybe a difficult concept, but that's why I put it on the exam, because I think it's worth focusing on. And because if you miss this, you miss a lot of Buddhism. A lot of Buddhism is training your mind. And if you can't act with your mind, then who cares? Mind doesn't even matter anymore, right? Okay. Choice, most people got that, right? Moral choices. People wrote about free will. That's not exactly right. Free will doesn't exactly apply to Buddhism. Why not? Is because with karma, there are traces, right? If I do something from a previous life or a previous activity from yesterday, right? If I drink a milkshake every day for lunch, you think I'm going to want to drink a milkshake on like the 30th day? Absolutely. It's called addiction, right? Where does addiction come from? It's not only from your body, right? Addiction is a little deeper than that. All right, this one was pretty easy. It's the teacher talking about the Buddha. He's surprised because the Buddha knew a bunch of things. This one was interesting. Gautami talking to the Buddha. What does it mean to rear someone? I mean, you could have looked this up. I told you not to use Google. I guess I didn't say don't use a dictionary. It just means to care for somebody. So a lot of people were confused. They thought Gautami was Siddhartha's mother. No, right? Siddhartha's mother was the one who grabbed the tree. Totally different person. She died shortly after giving birth to him. This is his aunt. She nursed him. She fed him with her breasts, right? And maybe people weren't aware that you can't do that if you're not somebody's mother or something. But she just took care of him. That's all it meant. So most people got that. This one, Mara's talking to the Buddha, trying to scare him, trying to distract him from achieving enlightenment. This one, a lot of people missed. The Buddha is talking to Angulimala, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, what does he have to bear? He has to bear his karmic retribution or something like that. That would be like saying, Sophie, you look a little sad today. What's wrong? And you would say, oh, my karmic retribution is catching up to me, right? It's some very sort of walkabout, very indirect way of saying, oh, I didn't read that part. I'm not actually sure what's happening. What's happening is villagers are throwing stuff at him, right? They're throwing sticks and stones at him because he killed their loved ones, right? So it's a very clear situation where people are attacking him and the Buddha is saying, bear it, right? Take those attacks, because if you don't, you're going to go to hell one day because you murdered their family members, you jerk, right? It's a pretty powerful scene, actually. Okay, this one, a lot of people missed too. It was a ghost. It was a ghost, and he had a pig mouth, and he had a golden body. And I thought it would be too easy because he talks about his complexion. I know he spelled it in a weird British way, but he's just talking about the quality of his skin. So all you had to do was say, what was the quality of that ghost skin? Oh yeah, it was golden, right? And he had a pig mouth. And again, what's the implication here? You can do good stuff and be rewarded for good stuff, but you can also do bad stuff and be punished for bad stuff. And then it gets mixed up at the end, right? You can still have good and bad operating at the same time. It's not always all good or all bad. And what does this do? Is it forces you to really focus on what activities you're doing well and which ones you're doing poorly. It's not all, kind of an all or nothing sort of situation. Can you go over the silk robe? I had no idea what that was. Silk robe. Oh, I know what you're talking about. We'll get there. Or did I already pass it? No. Yeah, that's the next one. Okay, there's still these fools who doubt you. That's Gautami, of course. So the Buddha is saying to Gautami, hey, there's still people who don't believe women can achieve enlightenment. Let's show them what's up. Do some miracles. And is the miracle that she became a nun? No, the miracle is like a real miracle. It's like fireworks and shape shifting and doing all sorts of stuff, right? Amazing things. So she's doing magic because she's a special person. Here's Angulimala, who's thinking about killing the Buddha. This was sort of interesting. People read this idea of taking the recluse's life, and they thought that meant like take on his lifestyle, which of course is not what it means. Angulimala is thinking of killing the Buddha. And I was asking, did he kill the Buddha? And of course the answer is no, he did not kill the Buddha. Yeah, so Aiden was confused about these saffron robes. His appearance is so peaceful and gentle. This one was hard. This one was hard. It was somebody is seeing someone who's very peaceful and gentle, and he's wearing robes. And so if you wrote anything like it's a monk, a holy person, a renunciate, a mendicant, I think the word in the book is mendicant if people looked it up in the book. So who are they talking about here? What is the scene where this is happening? What's the scene? Yes, it's the four sights, right? And so why is he so interested? I don't know if we totally covered this in class, but a lot of people gave creative answers, and I was very generous in rewarding them for it. But the one that I had in mind when I was creating it is he's seeing suffering for the first time. He's seeing death, disease, old age, and he knows it's coming for him. And the implication is, how can you be comfortable when death is coming for you? Right? The Buddha is very disturbed by this. But he sees this other person who's not disturbed by it. He sees somebody who's calm, who's relaxed, and he knows this is coming. He's sitting next to a dead man, right? I even had an image of that for you guys, right? He sees somebody who's basically just kind of hanging out and chilling. He's like, I want to do what that guy's doing, right? I want to learn what he knows. And so it's an important moment in his life, right? As he sees this peace and gentleness amidst all the suffering, it shows him another way of being. So hopefully that answers your question, Aiden. And then finally, number 10, this one, it's a little bit hard, I guess, but this is one where I like really nudged you. I was like, these are the Buddha's final words. They're real important. If you learn nothing else, you should learn these. And so of course it's the Buddha. All compounded things are impermanent. I expect as long as it's something about things falling apart, decay, movement towards states of disorder, whatever, interdependent origination, things existing in reliance on other things, anything like that would be fine. And then this idea of being vigilant, again, I was very generous. The main reason I put this here is because I want you to remember this, and the way I make you remember things is because I force you to stare at them for an hour in class. And so be vigilant, what does it mean? Pay attention, right? Some folks put like pay attention in all caps, and that's like, yes, that's how I present in class. Pay attention, right? And I know I can say this about class material, and that is it's something that teachers do say. It's like, do better on your next exam, pay attention. But this also applies to the rest of life, right? Is think about what is causing you problems. There's a lot of power in that. And again, maybe it's often condescending when people say this sort of thing, but there's an incredible opportunity here, right? Just from paying attention. So Buddha's final words. Questions so far? We still have 4 minutes. How's that all sound? So those are all the quotations. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult. Here, I asked you to write 2 short essays. Some people were confused about the instructions, but eventually figured it out. Obviously, in the future, if you're ever confused, just ask me, right? I could gladly give you advice. But yeah, I wrote, underline, please write 2 short essays in total. Most people figured out, okay, there are 2 windows I can write in. I can write 2 essays. Okay, that makes sense. And so one was about gods. I mentioned this earlier. It was basically because I wanted you to think about the gods, right? They were sort of an interesting detail in this story. The life of the Buddha is often told without the gods, and yet we saw them all over the place. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the role of gods? What's their deal? Some people pointed out that Mara is a god, and I thought that was a cool thing to point out because that's true. Most people focused on the good gods who were helping him, right, in the various places where they helped, and so made some conclusion based on that. As long as you gave, 2 scenes and made some sort of conclusion based on it, full points. If you didn't give 2 scenes, still you probably got like 18 out of 20, right? I was very generous with these sorts of things. Misogyny, this one was a little harder because I asked you to give 2 examples from the reading, right? And a lot of people struggled with this because maybe they didn't know what was in the reading, for example. I'm not pointing any fingers, but there were some things about like asking the Buddha to become a nun and being refused, and all of that is true. And there's a little scene where they kind of pointed that, but that wasn't part of the reading. That wasn't in the Gautami story. That wasn't anywhere, right? That was just something we talked about in class. So, what I really wanted to see is an engagement with the life story, or with the great going out of Gautami, with the life story of the Buddha, finding these Mara's daughters scene that did come up in the reading, so that was an important scene to point to. Finding misogyny in the Gautami story, a lot of places you could look for that, right? Plenty of examples. Or finding Gautami as a role model, right, for Buddhist women. And so that was also an argument that some people made too. So as long as you made an argument, support it with the reading, right? Bada bing, bada boom. And again, if you didn't support it with the reading, I still gave you 18 out of 20. And if you do the math, right, what's 18 times 5? Because full points is 20 times 5, which is 100. What's 18 times 5? It's a 90. That's still an A minus, right? Like, that's a pretty good score for, not actually including anything from the reading. So, all right, this third one. How does the life story of the Buddha illustrate the Four Noble Truths? So this is basically, do you know the Four Noble Truths? Do you know the life story of the Buddha? You probably have never really thought about them together. Let's give it a try and see what happens, right? And I was looking for specific, right? At least one specific scene. I think if I reword this next time, I'll say only one, right? Because a lot of people are just like, here are the Four Noble Truths. Here's the life story of the Buddha, blah, 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 done, right? And again, I still gave most points for that, but you didn't show me anything. You didn't show me you learned anything. You didn't show me you knew anything. You showed me you can list the Four Noble Truths. Good job, copy and paste. The more interesting ones were taking a very specific scene, suffering. Where does suffering show up in the life story of the Buddha? Well, we just talked about it, right? The four sights is a great example. So if you focus on that scene and say this demonstrates the suffering life story of the Buddha, that's a great answer, right? Some of the other ones may be a little bit harder, like the arising for suffering. That doesn't neatly show up. He figures it out under the tree, maybe, his battles with Mara, right? Because he has these temptations of lust and anger and fear and all these negative emotions coming up. He overcomes them. Maybe that is sort of like what causes suffering, and by overcoming these causes, he achieves enlightenment. Cessation, again, the moment under the tree, fine. And then the path, there's a lot you can say about the path, right? Because then you could talk about the middle way, the two extremes of his life. So many different places you could take it. Most people did not do that. They just kind of listed off the Four Noble Truths. But again, it was at the end of a long exam, and you were probably all tired and ready to get the hell out of here. So, and look at it, it's 9:35. It's about that time. So any final questions about the exam or about anything else?